Rafael Barlowe tells us what prospects are the best fits with Charlotte 5 through 8. Then we have an update on the Miles Bridges situation. Adam Silver defends the suspension. Player recap at the end, this time with JT Thor. All today, Locked On Hornets.
We're Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods, and that does include YouTube. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. That's Doug Branson. You can check out his Substack, Every Hornets Boxscore, everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm Walker Mail. You can listen to me every weekday on WFNZ from 12 to 3 p.m. Really appreciate Rafael Barlowe, Locked On NBA Big Board, joining us all last week. We have one more segment, right, Doug? We have
two
more.
Two.
Okay, sweet, awesome. Okay, we got more Rafael Barlowe. Did you hold him hostage with all of the prospect breakdowns for 8 segments that you recorded with him last week?
Yeah, he's still in my closet.
Okay.
But don't worry, he's fine. He's, I'll let him out. Don't worry.
Just don't put him next to the bees machine. That thing is radioactive and dangerous. Just don't do that. All right, here's one of the last couple segments Doug had a conversation with Rafael Barlowe right here.
Welcome back to the Locked On Hornets podcast. We're going to talk draft again. I've got my draft cap on. That means we've got Rafael Barlowe from the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to that. They're doing great work over there. We've talked in previous episodes, we've talked about the number 1 pick, 2, 3, and the Thompson twins, which look to be slotted somewhere in that top 5. Now I want to talk about the best of the rest, because we don't know where the Hornets are going to land in this draft. Could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, could be 6, could be 7, could be 8. And so we're going to discuss some of the prospects they could look at if they do land in sort of the back half of the odds. And I want to start with, I think, a really interesting prospect in my mind, somebody that I feel like could go anywhere from like 3 or 4 to 10, 11, and that's Cam Whitmore, the power forward out of Villanova. I said this on an earlier podcast, Rafael. I want to get your thoughts on this. I thought the best thing that happened to Cam Whitmore is that he didn't qualify for the NCAA tournament, because all the guys that qualified for the NCAA tournament that are around him basically put up dudskis in the tournament. So he just gets to sit there, the new car on the lot. He never has to leave. What do you think about that? Cam Whitmore as a potential pick in this range?
Yeah, that was a fair assessment, especially when you see how freshmen really struggled in the NCAA tournament, because most of these teams are like 23, 24, 4th, 5th, even 6th-year seniors, and I think that environment was a little too much for some freshmen to handle. But Whitmore is a guy that, like you said, I think he has a wide range. I think he can go as high as 3, possibly. I think it's slim chance, but if someone likes him, he can go that high. And then he could also fall down to 8, 9, or 10. The comparison that comes to mind is probably one of the worst comparisons name-wise. I'm pretty sure you've seen it. It's a guy, I guess he's a current Charlotte Hornet, but he didn't play this year. But there's been a lot of comparisons to Miles Bridges on the court. Okay. Miles Bridges on the court. As far as just the size, the athleticism, the shooting. And, when Miles was at his best, was he 28 a night? So if you end up with a Miles Bridges type production, then, that's good value in the top 5, 6, or 7, or 8. But I think he's a little bit more advanced as a shot creator than Miles was at the same time. But it's interesting. I think he can play in 3 and 4, and that's just the best comparison that comes to mind, even though the name might not be the most popular at the moment.
Right. I'll give you another one. I'll give you a classic name. When I watch his tape, I get a little bit of like Matrix Reloaded. I get a little bit of Sean Marion when I watch Cam Whitmore play. What do you think about that classic comparison?
Different body types. I could see like the motor, especially on the offensive glass. But in my opinion, if there's like one extremely unique player in NBA history, Deshaun Marion, from the jump shot to him being like a 6'7" power forward playing in the era where all the teams had 6'10", 6'11" power forwards. He was one of the league leader in rebounds, blocks, one of the few guys that could block 100 shots, make 100 threes, get 100 steals. That's big shoes to fill. But, I mean, if you get that, then that's a win.
Yeah, and I think the big concern from fans with drafting Cam Whitmore is that the Hornets currently, if they do decide to bring Miles Bridges back, suddenly you've got a glut of those type of guys. You got Bridges, you got PJ, and PJ might have to go to the bench, because Gordon Hayward is still under contract, and we don't know what's going to happen with that in the offseason. But currently they have a glut of those type of players. But Cam Whitmore is a freshman, and so there might be some time, some brief seasoning before he breaks into the lineup. So we'll have to see there. But we'll move on to some other prospects. Jarris Walker, another big boy, 6'8", 220 pounds. Couple of beefy boys we're talking about to open up this segment. Jarris Walker, I think there's been a lot of talk about his defense. People pretty much know that he's a beast down there. But talk to me about his offense. Where does he have to grow there? What is he going to excel at early on offensively, and where do you think he can go?
Offensively, he has a whole lot more game than what he showed at Houston. If you get a chance to watch like his high school film, and he played at IMG Academy, which he was on the same team as Keontae George and Jet Howard. So he played with talented players in high school. Probably 3 guys from that same high school team are going to be first-round picks this year. But he showed a lot more of his ball handling and passing. And one of the first things I noticed when I watched his film prior to the season was how good of a passer that he was. And not necessarily like your ball mover, but I'm talking about a guy that could handle the ball and be a primary in stretches in high school. And I know like there's a big gap between elite high school players and the rest of high schoolers. But I had this conversation with Bam Adebayo a few years ago. And I'm a Blazers fan, and I had mentioned to Bam. I said, how in the world did Portland pass you at number, I forgot where he went, but they drafted Zach Collins ahead of him. And he told me, he says, when you're evaluating players, always look at their high school film, because the high school will show you what they can do that they may not have been able to show in college. And he mentioned that if teams looked at his high school film, they saw that he could pass the ball. They saw that he could handle the ball a little bit more, while at Kentucky, all thing he did was get rebounds and finish around the rim. So ever since then, I've been looking at guys, what they did in high school, and I think Walker could be that guy that, people are high on off of the glimpses that they saw at Houston. But once he gets in an NBA setting, you're going to see the ball handling and the passing, and you're going to see that he is a lot more skilled than he was able to show.
The Hornets need some defense, and it feels like Walker could help provide some of that. But another guy that's really interesting to me is Anthony Black, 6'7", out of Arkansas, 195, another freshman. Just this draft is filled with fantastic freshmen. Talk to me about Anthony Black. What would he add defensively to a Hornets team that is desperate? They need some lockdown defenders. Can Anthony Black provide that for the Charlotte Hornets?
Yeah, I think he could be a really good wing defender, has the size and the strength and the athleticism and the mentality to be a good defender. My concern would be on offense, because he's not a good shooter. He's not a confident shooter. And I think he is best as a primary ball handler, which, you got a guy that's pretty good at handling the ball at the same size.
Right.
So I think he's some people actually compare him to Melo, like a toned down version of LaMelo Ball, but a better defender. Just doesn't have Melo's electricity, but who does? But I think that would be a weird mix.
Thanks for Rafael Barlowe joining us once again. We'll have one more segment, another conversation Doug had with him, but that's some great talk about some prospects that if worst case scenario happens in the lottery, you get a little bit later than you would want. At least there are some prospects there to chew on that the Charlotte Hornets could possibly take in the draft process. Thanks for joining us once again. And this episode, just a reminder, is brought to you by BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. But when we spend all of our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. It's entirely online. BetterHelp is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. And all you have to do is just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. More to come. Locked On Hornets. All right, Doug. So the Miles Bridges situation, we're actually getting some more information based off of the fallout of the suspension. It was controversial. We had our conversations about it. We'll continue to talk about Miles as we get closer to the regular season. But NBA Commissioner Adam Silver had comments, and I believe this was to a group of Associated Press writers that he actually gave the hat tip, as you mentioned earlier, off the air, to Audie Joseph, right, who used to live here in Charlotte. Great guy. But is that correct? Do I have that info correct?
Well, I think, yeah, he has some quotes in CBS Sports. This was a conversation that Adam Silver had to the Associated Press sports editors. So I think several people had the quotes here, yeah.
All right, so the quotes are a defense of the Miles Bridges suspension and talking a little bit about that process. Just to remind you, Miles Bridges was only suspended 10 games for the upcoming season, but the NBA officially called it a 30-game suspension, and 20 games will have been served already this past season. So just to have that in the back of your mind, 10-game suspension for next season, but the NBA is calling it a 30-game suspension with 20 having already been served. Now, Adam Silver reportedly defended that suspension, and Adam, this is the most interesting part here. Silver reportedly claimed that the league and Miles Bridges had a, quote, mutual agreement, end quote, for him not to play this season, with Silver apparently taking great care to not call such an agreement a suspension. So he was very careful to not have that be an official part of the suspension, but there was just this mutual agreement between Clutch Sports, Miles Bridges' agency, and Miles himself that he just wouldn't play last year. I'm going to leave that with you here first, Doug. What do you make of this almost off the record type of suspension, even though it's not that? What do you make of Adam Silver and Clutch Sports agreement as the season was beginning?
It's all very weird.
Yes,
I think that's my big takeaway, because it wasn't only an agreement between the NBA and Clutch Sports and essentially Miles Bridges. And I'm glad we got that confirmed, because I think that's what you and I assumed. But one of the things that we talked about in that assumption was that, or at least what I thought, was that it was weird that this all felt like a little bit of like collusion and an end around to the Players Association. But what these quotes also reveal, Adam Silver revealing that they also worked with the Players Association. So this involved everyone. Everyone was on the same page about Miles Bridges sitting out a year, and then they would figure it out on down the line. And I'm sure the Hornets understood that, or maybe they were being kept in the know as things progressed. But that is essentially how it all went down. It was behind the scenes. It's off the books. It's off the record. And as Marc Stein put it in his report, the comments got little play this week. Like Adam Silver revealing all of this wasn't a big deal. We're in the heat of the NBA playoffs. Nobody's talking about this. And, you know, I still think we're left with a lot of confusion and questions about what the NBA actually thinks Miles did or didn't do, what they think, if they think it was wrong, what the investigation revealed, and why we're seeing the punishment that we're seeing. Also interesting to note, Walker, is that Ime Udoka also got this similar treatment. He just became the Houston Rockets coach, and in these same comments, we're finding out that Ime Udoka essentially got there's a timeout policy now in the NBA. You go sit in the corner, you stare at the wall for a period of time, and then you get to come back and play with everybody else.
Yeah, and I'm, you know, I'm interested in trying to really figure out how much sense this makes, right? Because I agree with you. You said it's weird, and that's the best way I can describe it. Sometimes you just don't see this at least reported that often. And I remember us talking about the 30-game suspension, and I was like, well, maybe I'm naive. I don't know what kind of collusion this would point to, but there's this being agreement between Clutch Agency and Adam Silver in the league about the 30-game suspension as so it for not to be appealed, because that was what I was thinking the communication was going on. But I don't know if I thought that there would be an agreement between the two parties that they would just sit out all last year. And so there's no official punishment on the books. And that's what I'm having a hard time kind of grasping, because there isn't this official punishment. But I guess Miles Bridges does lose money in the fact that he doesn't play for the league. And I think this also points to teams, if they really wanted to add more talent, then Miles Bridges might have been signed. And just real quickly, there is a good chronology on Yahoo Sports. Jack Beyer, I think, is his last name. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that on Yahoo Sports. But he's got this chronology of the weird behavior on Miles Bridges, not really acting like he should be around the NBA. You know, there was the report of Bridges working toward a new deal with the Hornets in December. The Hornets denied that a week later. And what was the way they did that? It was like borderline comment section, Doug. Do you remember the way they did it? Was like the edit section or something, or editor's note or something.
Yeah, I mean, but all of this now makes sense. Like all of the workouts, all of the dapping up Hornets players in LA, and all of the videos that we've seen social media wise, it all makes sense.
Which because is the other weird behavior you would get to, right?
Right, because Miles and his team knew that the NBA had this worked out, that he was going to go sit in the corner and have timeout, and then he would get back. He would get to come back and play with his friends. And I think there was always a confidence that this is how it was going to end, and specifically that it would end in a way that it doesn't hurt the NBA from a PR perspective, because it's going to happen. It's happening now. These comments are happening now with the playoffs covering it all. And I would also say too that I wonder if this were a bigger name player. Like, this is the rare instance in which I think Miles not being a high-profile player actually benefits him, in that a lot of people aren't going to be caring about this because the national media doesn't care about the Charlotte Hornets. And Miles Bridges is one of their best players, but being the best player on the Charlotte Hornets, you know, insert analogy here, it doesn't really mean that much. And so if this were a bigger name player, I'm not sure the NBA would necessarily be able to get away with this. And that's really the takeaway here, is that they are essentially saying, look, you know, they're not even saying what happened. They don't really even want to acknowledge what happened and what their investigation revealed. They're just saying Bridges lost out on millions of dollars. And so, you know, we're not going to institute a really harsher punishment because of that.
Right. And I think maybe that's what I'm trying to articulate, and maybe I'm having trouble, you know, with that aspect of it, is that if you want to punish the person, if you really want to try to provide some disciplinary action for some wrongdoing, you can't have the offender agree to a punishment, right? Like that's the weird part, is if they have the say, oh yeah, all right, we'll do that. You know,
right. That's my whole thing, is it doesn't, I don't see how this disincentivizes whatever they think happened. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't, you know, and I just, none of it makes sense to me. I don't think it's ever going to make sense. And I think the NBA is counting on that. They're counting on it being a little vague, a little confusing, and everybody moves on. And the Hornets, according to Marc Stein, are you know, in the driver's seat in terms of re-signing Miles Bridges. They have until June 30th, I believe, June 29th. I'll get the exact date. The Hornets have until June 29th to tender a qualifying offer to reestablish him as a restricted free agent. They can then, you know, after that, I think July 1st, they can begin discussions. And it's in all likelihood, you know, they're going to re-sign him. There's no doubt about that, unless the team sells and the new ownership group feels like that's not in the best interest of the franchise at that point. Mm-hmm. But all signs point to that.
Yeah, no, it sure does. So, yeah, and the NBA will move on. Miles Bridges will move on. And I guess so will we. We'll get to the last segment here in just a moment. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
It's time for the player recap. JT Thor is up next. The more Thor movement. I know this is what you've been waiting for the entire time. Your leader, Doug Branson, will talk about some of the stats from the second-year player coming up next. Locked On Hornets. Doug, it's JT Thor. He's up next. Somebody that I think at the beginning of the season, I thought he was going to be such a Steve Clifford player. And then he was barely getting any run. He would get some DNP CDs. But I really thought, based off of last year's momentum, we really liked what we had in him as a second-round pick. Steve Clifford comes in, okay, defense, long, gives a bleep. Like JT Thor is a guy that Steve Clifford is going to love immediately. And it would be the exact opposite with James Bouknight. Well, that turned out to be kind of flipped. We've talked about it a million times. I think even without the injuries, James Bouknight would have gotten his opportunity. And it was weird that, at least in my head, right? It makes sense, I guess. But JT Thor just wasn't seeing some of that action. Then as you get close to the end of the season, he really finishes strong. And I think that was what was good. We saw the improvement from JT Thor, even if you cannot talk about improvement being on an escalator from year one to year two. It is not this smooth ride up. There have been the valleys, there have been the lows for JT, but he did finish on a high and perform very well with that opportunity of increased playing time.
Yeah, and a lot of it was, I think, dependent on his three-point shot, which was absolutely atrocious at the beginning of the season, and he turned into a competent offensive player by the end of the season. They were finding him in the corner. The Thorner three became a thing. I wanted it to be a thing. I was trying to push it and make it a thing, and then JT Thor would miss corner three after corner three, but by the end of the season, he was making them. Not only from the corner, though, he was stepping out and hitting some above the break threes, which I had really not seen at all. JT Thor made that a part of his game. And being a competent offensive player is important if you want to factor into like a future playoff rotation. It's not I don't think it's the thing that's going to make JT Thor, but you have to be competent on the offensive end, and I think that's what he developed. Now, what they're looking for from him mainly is going to be on the defensive end, and I think they were satisfied with that. And, typically he knew where to be, and then offensively, I think his passing has to get better. His shot making has to get better overall. There's just going to have to be improvements across the board. I think they want him to get stronger, but there's hope. There's a light for the more Thor movement. And certainly I've got a clip here. The coach loves him. I mean, Steve Clifford is definitely in the bag for JT Thor. Would you like to hear Steve Clifford himself comment?
Yeah, well,
it's
it's what I had too, right? Like, it's what you think about it. Steve Clifford bringing JT Thor up. I think that matters when you have press availability with any coach across whatever sport. If they bring something up and you are not the one to put that or plant that seed, right? He's bringing up JT Thor, how much he cares, how much he improved, how he's a guy that is asking all sorts of questions all the time. So, yeah, here's Steve Clifford praising one JT.
I think a lot of guys wouldn't have played. He played. Yesterday, I wouldn't say he was limping, but he was hurting. He never asked to come out, and then he hits a big shot. And he plays well. I don't think he's not going to be a rotisserie guy, right? He's not going to be the guy. He's not going to be 19 a night or this and that. But you're going to win. You have to have guys like him, and I think he's going to bring intangibles. Even at 20, he has the size, plus he's smart. We execute when he's on the floor. You could play him against good players, and I think he's going to be fine, especially after another summer of lifting and growth like that.
Before we dive in a little bit more, are you a rotisserie guy? Are you like a fried chicken guy? What? I don't know what kind of chicken you like. Apparently JT's rotisserie.
It's a great question. I'm an occasional rotisserie chicken guy if I'm hitting up some chicken from the deli. That was a go-to for me when I was like dead broke. I mean, rotisserie chicken, you could really string that out across the course of a week.
Oh, go to Harris Teeter and get that rotisserie chicken.
Yeah. Like it made a lot of sense then. As the career has blossomed, as the family has blossomed, the rotisserie chicken has worked its way out of the rotisserie. Occasionally, the Publix fried chicken plus some sides from the deli, that makes an appearance.
Very good.
But yeah, rotisserie chicken, I love it. And I'm sure the comments are going to light me up for this because I think there are a lot of strong rotisserie advocates out there.
I am one. I like rotisserie chicken as well. And man, Boston Market, when you would order the rotisserie chicken and the mac and cheese. Yeah, big shout, Boston Market. I don't know where everybody stands on that, but that's
I don't know where they stand. Are they still even in business?
I don't even know if they are.
Anymore.
I think there was one. I don't know, in Charlotte a couple of years ago that I would go to. So, anyways, JT Thor, rotisserie guy. We're here for it. Yeah, Steve Clifford clearly likes him, and that had changed. That had shown itself at the end of the season. You talk about the Thorner 3. He shot 38% from the corner this past season, shot well too the year prior. The 2-point percentage has to go up. If you're going to be a front court player where you're a long forward, you got to get more rebounds. You got to score better inside for sure. And you can't be this weird stretch 3-point. You can't be the stretch offensive player and the 3-and-D guy if you don't have the 3, right? Even that still has to improve quite a bit next season, but you see different things, right? Like he's almost a Kai Jones that knows where he's supposed to be defensively, and that's why he's out there on the floor. And offensively, you can start to see some of that stuff click a little bit.
Yeah, we learned that he's not going to be a star player in the NBA. I think we can be pretty confident in that. But as long as there are guys like Steve Clifford around that value what he does, and he continues to do those things, then he'll have a role on the team. Like I'm watching Caleb Martin a lot, with this Heat team, and I can see Thor doing some similar things for the Hornets in a potential playoff series that Caleb Martin is doing, where you're like, all right, we're going to ask you to take, 5 shots. We'd like you to hit 3 of them. And then the rest of the time, we just want you to be a Tasmanian devil on the other end of the floor. Like that's JT Thor's future role. And I think he could play it.
And now my real question is, you think JT could be that guy? Do you think Cody could be that Caleb Martin guy?
I don't know.
What about Cody?
I hope so.
They look alike. I know that. I don't know if the guy.
Well, I don't know what they look like. I don't know what Cody looks like anymore. I haven't seen him in a while.
Yeah, it's tough. We'll have that player recap a little bit later on, but it was a lost season for him. And I won't say lost. You can't have a lost season if you're JT and you're still trying to improve. You have a different coach, so it might take a little while. But man, really finished strong. Happy with what you got from him. And by the way, just last thing for me, Summer League was also disappointment. Remember, like we wanted to see him kind of take over in Summer League, be more consistent because he was the guy we felt best about in the last NBA draft process. It was Kai Jones. It was James Bouknight. JT Thor got playing time and showed more than the first round picks. And you had 2 to choose from. And Summer League's like, okay, can we really hit the ground running? No, we could not. But at least we did finish with a lot of improvement there at the end. And so I still feel if you were to bet on someone being a bigger part of the foundation going forward from that draft class, JT still is the number one answer, right?
Totally. And shouts to the Mason Plumlee trade. That's what brought JT Thor over to the Hornets.
That's right. All right. Thanks, Mason. Thanks, JT. Thanks to you guys for listening and making us your first listen every single day. Make your second listen game to game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the league with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.